morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Sophie's Stories, the podcast bringing you original, handcrafted stories right into your ear holes. Thank you so much for returning this week. I am so excited to see you here, and thank you so much if you are a returning listener. Thank you for coming back to my little corner of the internet over here. Now, not one for a cliffhanger, I'm back today with part 2 of The Turn. It's been a lovely couple of weeks. I had a little bit of a holiday, so thank you so much for being patient as I brought this one to you. And I really hope you enjoy this evening's story. And if you can see the pink in my hair, no you can't. Here's to hoping it'll wash out. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy The Turn, Part 2. The knocking continued as I stared into the voice recorder. The timer was flashing on the front in slightly transparent numerics. 10 minutes and 54 seconds. I perked up and pushed the device into the front of my jean pocket. The knocking intensified as I slowly turned around to face the locked door. My heart thumped enthusiastically as I edged closer, reaching my hand out to unlock the door. It burst open swiftly. Lucy bounded into the room, her little feet covered in gratuitously fluffy socks, and thumped over the floorboards as she skipped inside. She was talking when she came in, but I hadn't turned on my hearing yet, when I realised I was meant to be listening. And so I said to her, "This is my holiday. God, I'm not wearing heels to stand on ceremony in a communal holiday cabin. What do you think about it?" I mean, I had literally no idea. I stood still, slightly blindsided by my little welcome present. "Oh, well, I think it's ridiculous," I prospected. She rolled her eyes and nodded as she collapsed leisurely onto my bed. Taking note of my possessions laid out end to end atop the sheets. She must think it's a weird habit or something. It occurred to me that her experience of me as a human may now be, worryingly, controlling, as she appeared to be witnessing my audit of my own belongings. From a case I packed myself, alone in my house. Awkward. She didn't dare inquire after shifting her eyes back to me. "What are you wearing tonight?" she asked. "This?" I said hopefully. She giggled and said, "Perfect! You look ravishing, darling," as I stood in my 5-year-old jeans and a band t-shirt. Actually, I was pretty sure I looked ill as I could feel the colour had drained from my face with gusto. I tried to urge her to leave. "Are you going to do your makeup, or?" I asked, as she looked back at me blankly, with only one set of false eyelashes on. "Oh, damn, yes. She got up and started to make her way out of the door before turning around to face me. "I'll let you get back to..." She gestured softly at the bed. "Whatever this is." And she smiled sympathetically while she made her way out of the room. I listened for her footsteps tapping down the hallway and heard her bedroom door shut, but not lock, beside mine. I pulled the voice recorder back out of my pocket and looked over at the wood-clad walls. I wondered if she'd been able to hear it if I pressed play. As a precaution, I made my way over to the ensuite and locked myself in. I took a leisurely seat on the toilet lid and looked at the little device once more. It still had the time on it, flashing ominously. I wonder whose it was. After a couple of seconds of wondering, I decided to bite the bullet and press play. The recording played what I could only describe as white noise for a couple of seconds. I was on the edge of the toilet seat. I heard something scuffling over the microphone and could only assume I was being put in someone's pocket. I began to hear a muffled, quiet conversation. As I strained to hear the words, the recording stated the following. "Hey, where are you going?" a low male voice asked. "You've got to stay where I can see you, Luce." Lucy's voice perked up the dreary recording suddenly. "They're making me nervous. I'd rather just go upstairs and lock myself in my room." The male voice continued. "But if I can't see you, I can't help you." The voice was insistent and slightly strained, trying to limit his voice to a whisper. "I'm sorry, Lucas. I know this is supposed to fix everything, but..." Lucy continued. "But I can't be around them for too long. I just feel so horrible. I'm scared." I heard more ruffling, and it seemed the conversation had ceased. I looked at the timer steadily winding down, but only a minute or so had passed. Seconds later, more aggressive ruffling came across the tiny speakers, ending with the sound of a zip closing. Okay, so now it had been put back in my holdall. I decided that was enough of my creepy welcome gift and pressed stop. I stood up, indulging in a sharp inhale, and popped the recorder in my back jean pocket. I exited the bathroom and walked over to the mirror to make some small but overall inconsequential adjustments. I mulled over what Lucy had been saying on the recording. A little piece of me sunk, knowing that someone so young and bright seemed to have so many worries. I couldn't deny my unquenchable curiosity, though. Who was she talking to? I really didn't recognise the voice. I mean, that could be because I was listening from an inopportune position. But anyway, I bundled up my belongings into the holdall once more and threw on a hoodie to cover the recorder in my back pocket. Something called to me, though, from the farthest corner of my mind, faintly urging me not to leave it anywhere. The smell of our lunch cooking began to sneak under my door. In case you were wondering, I was simply marvelling at the possibilities in a parallel universe. I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag and swiped it before I left the room. I spat it out almost as quickly as I drank it, and it landed in a clean, translucent puddle atop the varnished floor. What on earth was that? The taste that filled my mouth was bitter and medicinal, and brought me back to being a child and my mother's infatuation with effervescent painkillers. I ran to the bathroom, spat out any remaining residue, and rinsed my mouth out as thoroughly as possible. What is going on today? A deep resentment started to grow in my soul, as I seemed to be slowly waving goodbye to my relaxing, drunken folly of a week. I stomped back into the bedroom and grabbed the 3 water bottles that were in the side section of my bag, escorted them into the bathroom and poured them all down the sink and then washed them thoroughly. I looked into the mirror above the sink and saw an angry, dishevelled woman looking back at me. Fine. Maybe it was just a bad batch or something. I stood up, tapped my hair behind my ear, and decided to make my way out. I exited the door to my room and turned around to lock it. I could see a figure from the corner of my eye. Not wishing to lock eyes with a crooked police officer in my current mood, I didn't bother looking. When the door clicked, I looked around and saw John exiting the hallway and entering bedroom 2 doors down from Lucy's. There were 8 rooms on this level, with 2 sets of 4 doors facing each other, all separated by a long hall about 1.5 meters wide. It was lined with a relatively worn, rainbow-coloured runner from end to end. It did make me a little ill. I was just glad I had elected to continue wearing my socks. I turned around and headed towards the staircase. On my way, I heard a door behind me open and then close. The 2 noises in quick succession. I ignored it and continued on to the stairs. I made my way down and onto the ground floor landing. Like a cartoon character smelling a delicious meal, my head turned on an instant and I felt the sudden need to check the room allocation list again, knowing I hadn't inspected it in particular detail the first time round. I found my name, then followed it down to Lucy, then Joyce. The list was actually split into 2. One with a column named N facing, and one column with the header S facing. All of the female names seemed to be on the north facing list. I checked again, slightly confused for a second. This meant that the room I had seen John entering earlier had been Abby's. What did I miss when I went upstairs? Had John finally professed his undying love to her? Serenaded her on the manicured lawn? Followed her up there in complete desperation without her knowledge? That last one wasn't likely, but it was an amusing thought and something that drunk John might do, with no malicious intent, of course. I mulled this over as I followed a sign pointing to a large room on the left named Dining Room. As I came upon the entrance, I was met with an erroneously large dining table that, to be honest, simply reminded me of a medieval residence. I imagined a couple sitting opposite each other on either end, sharing an uncomfortably separate dinner. Maybe this was foreshadowing for the kind of energy that would join us during our meal this afternoon. Tall candles created a neat line down the middle of the table on candelabras. Fresh pine branches from the dense forests outside wrapped around them, and elegantly stacked place settings covered the rest. I made my way around the table as the sunlight sunk into the room through 3 large sash-and-case windows. I could feel the cold seeping in from outside through the single panes. I found my place setting and stood behind my chair as I heard a set of footsteps grazing the hallway. John's friendly face emerged from the doorway, smiling at me. "Oh, look who it is!" John's energy bounced around the old traditional room in an alien manner. It tapped off the walls and against the formal dinnerware, meeting a cold and unwelcoming reception. I realised I hadn't said anything yet. Probably should. "Hey, how are you?" The words that escaped my mouth and the forced smile couldn't have been less convincing of my current comfort level. "You okay?" John asked as he swiftly made his way towards me. Yep, I'm totally fine." "Better," I gestured to the table. "You're next to me." "Perfect," he said, shuffling past me carefully. He pulled out his chair and sat down dramatically, producing another bottle of wine from his side. "Let's fire in then. Everyone else is slacking to get down here." he said. I sat down next to him and watched him pour me a generous glass of red wine and then pour a twin for himself. He lifted his glass and I picked up mine to cheers. The sweet wine crawled into my mouth and tasted like momentary relief. Thanks, I said, continuing to sip. I often wondered where my innate disability to keep a secret came from. I assumed it was my mother's ominous threats for me to behave as a child. I wonder what's on the menu today. What do you think? Beans on toast? Boxed macaroni? John teased. Honestly, I wished it could be. Then I would have at least had 70% chance of being better than what they would be serving us today. It's fish. Can you not smell it? I laughed a little as I spoke. He stopped to sniff for a second. No, I can't, Sarah Kay. And that, my friend, is possibly the most ominous detail. As he finished his sentence, we both became aware of other bodies entering the room. Everyone else was joining us. For anyone keeping notes, we were now at full capacity. There was John, Lucy, Joyce, and her sister Abby, Ryan and his wife, Rebecca, Tom, Lucille, and me. I suddenly realised someone mustn't have been staying on the same corridor as us on the second floor. Once everyone had settled, some of the kitchen staff began to serve us at the table. Wine was flowing, almost. Food cluttered the table, and we all made mundane chatter that filled the once dead, high-ceilinged room. And amongst the various discussions, I heard Tom mention that he had set up camp on the third floor. He, along with his wildly antisocial disposition, most likely felt that he'd won the jackpot with that stroke of luck. Joyce, as I looked across the table at her, was wearing a formal day dress and a bright shawl draped across her shoulders. She looked back at me from the side of her eyelid and was managing, quite spectacularly, to seem disappointed, even indirectly. Tom sat next to her and engaged in animated conversation with Brian, which is what I seem to be highly aware of. Lucy was next to me, long eyelashes fluttering as she spoke excitedly to Abby. They were the closest in age and spoke with the same useful rigour that made me tired just spectating. As a matter of fact, I was feeling particularly tired. I could feel my eyelids growing heavier and weighing down over my eyeballs. I let out a big yawn and refocused my eyes on Joyce as she sat across from me. Or tried to. As I strained to look at her, she became blurrier, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was her odiously loud clothing choices today, or something else that was affecting my eyesight. Nope, it was definitely me. My body was groaning in my chair, trying to keep me upright. My spine started to feel a little jelly-like, and I placed both hands on the table in front of me for support. John tapped me gently on the arm. "Sarah Kay, you tired?" said the man who'd taken an 8-hour sleeper train to get here. "I'm fine," I slurred slightly in my sleepy state. "I think I'll go for a nap." He nodded and tapped my shoulder as he watched me exit the dining room in a slow, laboured fashion. It was as if my feet had turned into flippers and I was progressing using a combination of dragging and tripping. I heard the table fall silent behind me as they presumably watched me stagger out of the doorway. I reached the stairs as the memory of how I got here whittled away, and I could feel my knees shaking. I placed my hand haphazardly on the banister and braced to pull myself up the stairs. Momentarily, I felt a hand on my back and heard John's voice quietly in my ear, saying, "Are you feeling okay, Sarah Kay? You're not going to pass out on us, are you?" "No," I mumbled groggily, when really the answer was yes. John placed my free arm over his broad shoulders and, for all intents and purposes, carried me up the necessary flights of stairs. My vision was now completely blurred, as if I was looking through frosted glass on a winter morning. My mind was also losing clarity as I jumped in and out of pure consciousness. I was mentally trying to staple this story together in my head, but instead of it stacking together to create a neatly bound book, the moments were stacked in every direction and disorderly atop one another. John asked me for the key. I handed it over and he fiddled with it as he tried to hold me up at the same time. He popped open the door to my room and guided me over to the bed carefully. He held my arm still and I perched on the edge of the bed and then let my torso collapse. My head hit the pillow and a glorious wave of relaxation flushed through me thoroughly. John picked up my legs and placed them on the bed as well. My eyes were completely shut as I began to drift away quickly. The darkness from my eyes seeped through to my brain, and as I gave up trying to stay awake, I heard my door shut and lock. My episode was entirely uninterrupted, although I had no frame of reference as to how long it had been. As I started to come to, I realised I was now being awakened rudely, as I heard a substantial scream. It was muffled and seemed to be coming from one of the other rooms. As I registered that it was a scream, my eyes began to open in a slow and trying manner. As I managed to open them fully, I became aware of a strong stabbing sensation deep in my cranium. "Oh God, stop," I thought. Hangover? No, surely not. This was the headache straight from the bowels of hell. My head felt like it was rotting from the inside. I looked over to the window. It was pitch black outside. I then rolled over, using only gravity, and stared at the locked door. I tuned back into the chaos that had ensued in the rest of the house. What was going on? I heard many pairs of footsteps thumping down the hallway, and then they stopped, and a woman was crying. I slowly raised my head from the pillow and looked at the door. My bedroom door key had been slid back under the door. As I stood up, the pain intensified. I bent down gently and scooped the key up off the small carpet that lined the door and let myself out. I wrapped my hoodie around my body and walked towards the end of the long corridor, truly looking like I had actually been cast in The Shining. Speaking of corridors, I realised that all the excitement was coming from the floor above. I started up the stairs. They were slightly steeper than the ones that led to the ground floor. The force of gravity itself was strengthening my newly acquired migraine. I could see a group gathered around an open bedroom door, and I reached out to tap Ryan on the back lightly. Startled and eyes wide, like I was driving at him in a double-decker bus, he stepped aside slightly to allow me to peer into the room in amongst various sets of shoulders. As I looked into the room, all I could see was a silken red colour covering the floor, back wall, and bed. Quite a design concept, I pondered as I squeezed John's arm for him to let me see in. He turned around and clasped me by the shoulders sternly. "Morning, Sarah," he sighed. Sarah? It was then I realised how comforting John's nickname for me had become. "John?" I questioned. "What's happening in here?" I continued. "I don't know if you want to look in there right now." The police officer behind him was walking towards the open door. His fingers were stained red as he shook his head and sighed loudly. "He's gone," he announced, emotionless. As everyone shuffled aside to let him through, my eyes fell upon a sight I will never be able to fully erase from my memory. It was Tom. His body was strewn across the top of the sickly yellow bedspread. His eyes were staring coldly, and he had stab wounds just everywhere. I couldn't help but stare into his unforgivable shrine of violence. Tom's glasses were perched askew on his face. He was still fully clothed and hadn't unpacked his bags yet. My eyes shifted over to the wall. The blood had flown so far up them it was reaching the ceiling and still in spatters everywhere. My headache disappeared as I stood in silence. I couldn't look at him for too long, but Tom's face did not look peaceful. I shut my eyes for a second as they welled up a little with tears, and all I saw in my mind's eye was Tom's face, snarled up and unmoving in a stiff expression of torment. And that, lovely folks, is the end of part 2 of The Turn. I really hope you enjoyed this evening's story. I hope it gets you off to sleep well, and I will see you next time for part 3 of The Turn.